You know, I'm having fun playing. I could not preach this morning and I'd be okay. Some of you might be okay too. Just keep on playing. You know what? It's okay. I don't take offense to it. Hey, we are almost through our series of Life on the Rock. Believe it or not, this is part 5. Next week will be part 6. That's it. Of all the series that we have done most recently, this has been one of my favorites personally. And so I'm kind of sad to see it drawn to a close. I think it's been good. I think we've been learning stuff. I think we've been understanding what it means to have a life built on the rock. And I love that as we've been working through the Sermon on the Mount backwards, that it ends with Jesus has all of this teaching, and he ends with those who hear and do what I say are like the wise man who built his house on the rock. Those who don't are like the foolish man that built his house on the sand. It all started. It all capitalizes with that, or it all ends with that last phrase. That it's great to hear these things, but if we do nothing with them, we miss the point. We miss the point. It's not just about hearing and saying, yeah, I really like that. It's about taking the things that we learn and putting them into action so that at the end of the day, we have a house that's been built on the rock. And we know that it's more than just about building a physical house on the rock, right? It's about building a spiritual life that is built on the rock of Christ. So everyone who hears these words of mine and acts on them is like the man who built his house on the rock. And as we spent the past few weeks working backwards, we come up to one of, I think, the lesser liked portion of the Sermon on the Mount. I really think so. And I think you'll see why. We're going to look at Matthew chapter 5, the Gospel of Matthew chapter 5, verses 21 to 48. And I have chunked all of this together because it's essentially talking about relationships. It's talking about how do we get along with one another? How do we get through this life with people and do it well? Most of the time, Bibles break it down and we have a section that talks about anger, and a section on adultery, and a section on divorce, and a section on oaths and retaliation and love for enemies. And what we do is we pick and choose the parts that we like and we ignore the rest. Bad hermeneutic. Bad way to read the Bible. So we're going to deal with this as a chunk, because that's really where it was. And I shared a couple weeks ago that Jesus didn't say, okay, now we're going to talk about this little part. Now we're going to talk about this little part. He was preaching. He was sharing. This was part of the message. And it all went together. So we're going to read it that way. So Matthew chapter 5, starting with verse 21. You have heard that it was said to those of ancient times, you shall not murder, and whoever murders shall be liable to judgment. But I say to you that if you are angry with a brother or sister, you will be liable to judgment. And if you insult a brother or sister, you will be liable to the council. And if you say, you fool, you will be liable to the hell of fire. So when you are offering your gift at the altar, if you remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go first be reconciled to your brother or sister. And then come and offer your gift. Come to terms quickly with your accuser while you are on your way to court with him. Or your accuser may hand you over to the judge, and the judge to the guard, and you'll be thrown into prison. And truly I tell you, you will never get out until you have paid the last penny. You have heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery. But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one of your members than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one of your members than for your whole body to go into hell. It was also said, Whoever divorces his wife, let him give her a certificate of divorce. But I say to you that anyone who divorces his wife, except on the ground of unchastity, causes her to commit adultery. And whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery. Again, you have heard it said to the ancient times, you shall not swear falsely, but carry out the vows you have made to the Lord. But I say to you, do not swear at all, either by heaven, for it is the throne of God, or by the earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. And do not swear by your head, for you cannot make one hair white or black or gray or brown. Let your word be yes, yes, or no, no. Anything more than this comes from the evil one. You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, but I say to you, do not resist an evildoer. If anyone strikes you on the right cheek, turn the other also. And if anyone wants to sue you and take your coat, give your cloak as well. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go also the 2nd mile. Give to everyone who begs from you, and do not refuse anyone who wants to borrow from you. Have you had enough yet? Because Jesus isn't done. Imagine this. You have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemy and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be children of your Father in heaven. For he makes his sun rise on the evil and on the good, and send rain on the righteous and on the unrighteous. For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Do not even tax collectors do the same? And if you greet only your brothers and sisters, what more are you doing than others? Do not even the Gentiles do the same? And if that wasn't enough, this last verse should put you over the edge. Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect. Anyone feel like giving up? I know why we break it down. I know why we break it down and we look at these passages individually. Because it's a lot to handle. And it's good to break these passages down. But it's also good to look at them in context. And to look at this repetition of, you have heard it said, but I say. You have heard that it was said to the ancients, but I say. So it's good to look at all of these things. And if you have your bulletins, I've got notes in there for you. And I always do my best to fill them in. And I'm sure that you never walk away with an empty blank. But as we look at this passage, the very, very first thing we look in an overarching, contextual manner is that Jesus is focused on our relationships with friends, enemies, spouses, neighbors, and God. Jesus cares about how our relationships are going. He cares about them. They matter. If they didn't matter, we wouldn't have this chunk of scripture. We really wouldn't. Our relationships with friends matter. With enemies, it'd be nice if just friends mattered. Just the people I like. Why does Jesus have to care about how I treat my enemies? With our spouses, with our neighbors, and with God. All of it. In fact, you get this idea that Jesus is looking at us not just as a number to get into heaven, but as a whole person who has a life to live. I think sometimes in the church we've made a huge error. We get focused on the number of how many did we have in church today, how many got saved, how many got baptized, and we get excited about that number who are getting into heaven, and then we do nothing to help the rest of the person become healthy and to live a good whole life. And Jesus says, guys, it's more. It's more than this. It's everything. All of our life matters. I find that remarkably reassuring and terribly scary all in the same shot. Terrifying. Thank you. That's what I was going for. Terrifying. Scary. Did you like that? Scarifying? That's what happens when you get the scary and the terrifying going together. Because it means that God knows what's going on in my life. And it should be scarifying because I know parts of our life aren't that great, right? Yeah. I'm going to coin that. Let's see if we get it in the dictionary. Thank you. Did you ever wonder why? Why Jesus cares about everything? Why would Jesus put this whole passage in here? Why does Jesus care so much about the way we relate to others? I mean, honestly, shouldn't Jesus' concern just be how we relate to God? Shouldn't Jesus just make sure that we are relating to God well and that we are not going to hell, that we are going on to spend eternity with God? Doesn't that sound churchy? Doesn't that sound spiritual? It kind of does, doesn't it? It kind of has that, I am just concerned that you spend eternity with God. Sounds very spiritual, doesn't it? But Jesus says something that is far more spiritual than that. Because he's concerned about how you live now and your eternity. It's this both and, not either or. See, our relationships matter. The way we treat other people around us, whether we like them or not, matters not only to us and to them, but also to God. And Jesus really takes the time to hammer home this point. See, I think part of the reason that Jesus is concerned about our relationships and concerned about the way we even treat the people we don't like and the way we treat the people who have harmed us is because our relationships, for good or bad, reveal our character. They reveal what is inside of us. They reveal our character. In fact, I would say that it is the greatest identifier of our integrity. Our relationships reveal our character, more specifically, our integrity. And Jesus is saying, unwrapping the truth that true men and true women of God, true followers, are more than just concerned about where they spend eternity. They're concerned about how they are living and how they are interacting with every person that they come in contact with, whether they like them or not, whether they know them or not, whether they have done something wrong to them in the past or not, or they've always been kind. We should be concerned about that. And it sounds like Christians should be moral. Didn't you almost make that summation? It sounds like what Jesus is saying, you should be moral. For the record, moral is an adjective, as an adjective, is defined as someone who is concerned with the principles of right and wrong and the goodness or badness of human character. That's really how we define moral. But as we look at what was said to the ancients, wasn't that really about being moral? He says, you have heard it said, you shall not commit murder. I'm going to go out on a limb here. I'm praying that no one has committed murder in the church. Can anyone say, I've never murdered anyone? I'm really, really hoping that this morning.
Murder.
By definition, moral people, right?
That's it.
Yeah. See, it becomes more than that. It becomes absolutely more than that. And I just still get flustered when God moves me out of the narrative that I have written. So as I'm looking here, I'm searching for how to tie right back in. But I am certain that there are, in fact, I know for a fact that there are lots of people in the world who have never murdered another person. That's a good thing. It's a very, very good thing in my eyes. But how about getting really angry? I'm not going to ask that question. I'm not going to ask that question. I'm really not going to ask the next question. Because Jesus goes so far as to say that even if you mutter under your breath the words, you fool, which is any insult, it is the same as murdering the person. Nuh-uh. It's not. Not in my eyes. size of this. He says, because what starts with that insult, what starts and progresses with that anger, takes you to some place that is so bad. It starts to reveal our integrity. It starts to reveal our character. It reveals who we really are. So yeah, I may not do the physical act of murdering someone, but it sure doesn't mean that I'm living like Christ when I'm going around muttering things under my breath, especially as I drive through town, which is the hardest for me. It is so hard not to say something under your breath, and I have to be much quieter now because I have 2 kids in the car, and Allie hears everything. And I really don't want her coming to church and saying anything bad because you'll know where it came from. Jen and Midnight, of course. But I know the stuff that I say and I do, she will mimic. In fact, I'll tell you, she's learned how to say things under her breath at 3 years old. I don't think I had to teach her. And I don't think Jen taught her. It's somehow she knows how to do that stuff because it's within us. And Christ says that muttering those words under your breath holds you as liable as murdering someone.
You hear that, Joseph?
I do not like that. In fact, I still want to say no. Because it just doesn't seem like the same thing. But we're used to looking at it from the lens of being a moral person, of being a good person. And the lens of a moral person and the lens of a Christ follower are different. Because through the lens of a Christ follower, calling someone a name is just as bad as murder. Through the lens of a moral person, everybody does it. Do you see the difference? And so Christ is starting here to do something that everyone in the crowd started to panic with. He's raising the bar. This is more than just follow the law and get by. This is about get to the heart of who you are as a person. And let me get in there and work. Because it's going to reveal your character. It's going to reveal your integrity. And let's be honest, one of the problems that has harmed the church for many, many years are professing Christians with no integrity. Right? We can stand on the street corner and proclaim the gospel, but if we go home and we treat our families like garbage, what message are we sending? We can stand in church and say everything is great, but if I go out and I treat people awful, what is that saying? There is a mismatch in who you profess to be and who you really are. And Christ is saying it's not just about the big stuff, it is about absolutely everything. It is time to raise the bar if you were going to follow me. And every time he says this, you have heard it said, but I say, he is upping the ante for his followers. He is upping the ante for the men and the women who were in that crowd then. He is upping the ante for every person who is hearing or reading the gospel today. It's more than being moral. It's more than being nice. It's more than avoiding what we would consider the really big sins. It's about completely surrendering and allowing Christ to change who we are to the very core. How we treat people matters, especially with Life on the Rock. And I was thinking about this, and it was something that I didn't even put a lot of stock into while it occurred. Multiple years ago, and I'm getting to the point that I can say long ago, and it's starting to be long ago. I have stories now that are more than a decade old. And I'm like, wow, and I have some that are 2 decades old. I'm like, how did that happen? But, so somewhere in the past years, and this did actually happen, I know Preachers have been accused of making up stories, and sometimes that happens, but this did actually happen. I was out to lunch with a friend, and this friend had a very simple policy. He liked to go out to eat, and he would also tip well. And so he would start the dinner by placing the tip in the center of the table. Oh, yeah. Oh, you see where this is going?
Yeah.
He would start the dinner by placing the tip anticipated on two things: what he expected to spend, and how pretty the server was. I'm just putting it out there. We're talking about treating people well, right? So based on what he thought he would spend, because he wouldn't want to go too much more than 20%, that was the starting point. And I think he always estimated a hair low. He would assess the server, and in his case, he hoped for a waitress, and he hoped that she was very pretty. And he would put a nice tip on the table for the pretty waitress. If the waitress was not pretty in his eyes, part of the tip removed. You gasp, but we do this, right? We make assessments of people on the outside. And if you were a male server, you weren't getting much of a tip. You weren't. And every time throughout the dinner something went wrong, and not even wrong, but it just wasn't to his standards, guess what happened? Part of the tip went, just a little bit at a time, so that he could keep working at it. And I thought about that, and I thought, you know what? There was a brief moment where I thought, wow, what a way to save money. Not bad. Flashing thought. Flashing thought. I worked in a restaurant, I worked with servers, I know what it's like. Not a good practice. But there was a fleeting thought that said, wow, this works really well. If you do a good job, you get a good reward. If you don't do a good job, you don't get a good reward. Sounds really nice, right? And a couple years later, I went out to dinner with our state coordinator at the time, Vern Allison, and Vern and I were sitting there, and we're getting ready to leave, and I'm going to tell you, it had been some of the worst service I had ever had in my life. But I've eaten out a lot. I like to go out to eat. That's one of my favorite things to do with Jen, especially without kids now, because what a relaxing atmosphere. Instead of meeting someone else's needs, I have someone who is bringing stuff to me, and I don't have to move or get up, and I actually get to eat my food while it's hot instead of lukewarm or cold. And we love to go out and do this. And so we're out, and it was one of the worst. The food was okay, it was average, but the service was bad. It was bad, bad, bad. And I was thinking, do I really need the tip? I was thinking it was just that bad, do I really need to? And I was like, you know what, I'll do the bare minimum. And my buddy did something completely unexpected. He threw a generous tip on the table. I said, really? He said, yeah. If it's that bad all the time, she needs a really good tip from us. Could have knocked me over. He wasn't saying, it's fine, it wasn't bad. Oh, it was bad. And I don't think it was just the day. But there was something there about treating people well, regardless of how they had treated me. I hope that stays with you, by the way. Because as I worked in the restaurants, Sunday was the worst day for tips, as busy as it was. But the absolute best tip, or what I consider the absolute worst service. And as it has come back to me time after time, because that's not been the only time that I've had service that wasn't quite what I desired. It also hasn't been the only time in life that people haven't quite lived up to the standards that I thought they should live to. I've been reminded that regardless of how they treat me, Christ calls me to do something completely different. He calls me to raise the bar. and he calls you to raise the bar. It absolutely matters and is something as simple as the way we treat our server. You might feel guilty if you go out today. Just so you know, that's okay. I don't look at that as me. I look at that as the Holy Spirit at work. That Christ calls us to raise the bar. I was stunned. I had never thought about tipping that way. I had never thought about just that whole situation. And it opened my eyes. And it changed me. And the words that I hear coming across from it is that this is the way of Jesus. Always. Always treating people well. Jesus demands a higher standard for our relationships. Charity raises the bar for people. And Jesus says that it's wrong to call someone a name under your breath as it is the murder. Doesn't seem right, but it is. It seems like quite an outrageous example. And what he shares as the illustration between the one who is bringing his sacrifice to God. Did you catch this in the beginning of the section we were reading? I want you to get a picture. It was pretty crazy through our greeting time this morning, wasn't it? And this is part of Cornerstone. We have a crazy greeting time. We're a little bit of a crazy group of people, and I'm okay with it. I'm happy. I enjoy it. I love being able to talk and to fellowship, and it's cool that I can slip out and go grab my daughter and bring her back, even though she's crying in the back. Because part of those relationships matter. But I want you to picture the day of sacrifice. And everybody bringing their sacrifices into the temple. Now, when we give a gift or an offering to God, what do we typically give? 10%. Money, right? We typically give money. That's typically our offering. It's the gift that we give to God. But in Jesus' time, what did they typically give? Some sort of animal. Imagine church this morning. 50 lambs running around. Some goats. Some birds. How much different would it be? It'd be pretty different, right? I will not even imitate that, but that was great, Kim. That was great. It would be. It would be. And I can't even say the word back. That's what it would be. But imagine livestock mixed in with people as you're gathering together to worship and to sacrifice to God, to pay for your sin, to make this offering that would be acceptable to God. It's going to be really chaotic, right? People everywhere, animals everywhere, and if your lamb or your goat is anything like my dog, it's probably not going to be just right there beside you. You know, it's absolutely chaos. And so think of the outrageousness of Jesus saying, if you are in line on your way to make your offering to God, and you've got your goat right beside you, and you remember that somebody has something against you, leave your sacrifice, leave your goat right there, drop your goat right there, and go make amends. What's going to happen to the goat? Is it going to save your place in line? It's going to be gone, right? It's going to add to the chaos. He's saying that this is so important that it matters more than anything else you can give to God. In fact, if you're on your way to make your gift to God, or you're giving what you can and you remember something that someone has against you, you go and take care of it before you make that offering. You walk away from all of the chaos. You leave the gift that you had to pay for the sins that you had committed, and you go and fix the relationship. I think churches would be a whole lot different if we abided by that principle. Either we'd be completely broke, or we wouldn't have the relationship problems that we have. The way we treat each other matters. In fact, this whole passage it reminds me of one of my favorite Old Testament verses. And pull your bulletins out. If you don't have them out, pull your bulletin out, pull a pen out. I was going to print up a memory verse for you this week, and I didn't do it. Pull out your bulletin, pull out your pen. I'm going to give you one of my absolute favorite Old Testament verses because I think it really sets the precedence for where Christ comes in, and it's the backdrop for the Sermon on the Mount. It's Hosea 6:6. Hosea 6:6. For I desire. I want you to write this down. I didn't give it to Dale, so it's probably not going to be on the screen. For I desire mercy, comma, not sacrifice, comma, and acknowledgement of God rather than burnt offerings. That is absolutely profound. God desires mercy, not sacrifice, an acknowledgement of God rather than burnt offerings. And isn't that what we see Jesus saying to the people right here? You think this is what you're supposed to do. You go in, you have your lamb, your goat, your doves, whatever you may have, and you go in to present that as an offering. And I would much rather that you give mercy and that you would acknowledge me rather than burn the sacrifice. But if we're going to be honest, and we should be honest, right? Always. In fact, it's something we shouldn't even have to tell people, honestly, this is what I did. Really? Are you lying to me the rest of the time? Or, I want you to be honest for a second. It almost assumes that we lie to one another, or that we lie to ourselves. God says, put that stuff aside and give mercy and acknowledge me, rather than the burnt offering. In fact, he goes even a step further, and it's the passage we're going to look at next week. But he tells this group of people that I require righteousness that exceeds that of the scribes and the Pharisees. And I want you to put yourself in the crowd that day. Jesus has just said, I desire righteousness that exceeds the scribes and the Pharisees. And then he says, you have heard that it was said that if you murder, it is the same as saying something under your breath. Or if you say something under your breath, it's the same as murder. And he continues to raise this bar. I just picture so much hopelessness in the audience that day. Especially for the ones who didn't listen. For the ones who heard part of this. Because the scribes and the Pharisees, they knew the law. They had helped to expand the law from 10 to over 600. Just so that they didn't hurt the 10. Right? They knew it well. And I'm supposed to do a better job than they are. I'm supposed to work harder than the scribes and the Pharisees. And as you listen to this, doesn't it sound like we're supposed to work harder? Doesn't it sound like we're supposed to do more, to be better, to be even more moral than anybody else out there, to be gooder? Or to be the goodest? I know, that's awful. But isn't that the impression that you're getting? Especially with the last line of this passage. Because it's one thing to say, be more righteous than the scribes and the Pharisees. It is one thing to say, it is the same to mutter something under your breath as it is to murder something. It is one thing to say, love your enemy. Love your enemy. But this last verse, Jesus says to be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. And if that doesn't leave you with the feeling of, I can't do this, nothing will. Because in that gut level interior, we know that we're not perfect. Right? I'm so glad no one is saying yes, they are. Because we could help you. None of us are perfect. And Jesus tells me that not only do I need to do all of this stuff, not only does my righteousness need to exceed that of the scribes and the Pharisees, I have to be perfect. And there's only one phrase that I can really, really say that is truthful, that is honest with both God and myself. I can't. Or what I have in your bulletin, impossible. Not that I won't try, not that I don't want to, it's that I know me. I know me. And I know that as much as I want to do this, I can't. I just can't do it on my own. And that's exactly what Christ was driving at. He says, we gave you these laws and you think you can do this on your own. You got the law, do not murder. And guess what? No one in this room is murdered, right? You got the law, do not commit adultery. You got the law, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. And just by the way, that wasn't so that we could extract revenge. That was so that we couldn't hurt someone worse than they hurt us, just putting it out there. And he says, you know what, I'm going to tell you, don't even take that. Don't even take the revenge that you had. Don't waste your time counting that tit for tat kind of thing, that getting back because you got me. And he winds it up and he says, be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. And man, if you're at all honest, we just can't do it. And that's where the hope comes in. Because see, for Christ, he wanted to drive them to the point where they understood they couldn't do it on their own. It's the exact same place he wants you and I to be. Because as long as I believe I can do it on my own, and I can be a good and a moral person, I have no need for Christ. I have no need for forgiveness. Because I haven't done anything wrong. But when I get that gut level honest and I say, I can't do this, what's my only option? I guess I have two. One is to walk away. The other is to ask for help. And in the moment we ask for help, God is invited in. And suddenly, things begin to change. Not that they're perfect, and not that we never ever struggle with muttering things under our breath. Been a Christian for many years. I've been very sincere in that for many years. And yet, I have muttered stuff under my breath. Did it yesterday, coming home.
Hey, wait a minute.
What I'm going to preach.
What did Dale do?
Hey.
It wasn't even Dale. Dale rode with me all the way to Punxsutawney yesterday, and we had a good conversation. I think, at least from my perspective, it was a good conversation. I don't know, 4 hours in the truck with the pastor may not be good to you, but to me, I thought it was great.
I had my radio on. No, it was all good.
You guys, I had the car seats out and everything, and nobody wanted to ride with the preacher. I don't know what that says.
What's that say about me?
Dale took a little pity on me. Dale gave me some mercy, and he was willing to ride with me. And as we joke together, as we laugh together, don't miss the point of this. That we may be able to do good and moral things on our own, but it will never measure up to God's standard. Because God's standard is that we can become perfect. Another word for that is holy. That we become holy like God. And the only way we can do that is by saying, I can't do it on my own. It's an overwhelming passage of Scripture. And if you read it with any sincerity, it should drive you right to your knees, screaming, I can't. It's the response of that crowd that day. They had never heard anything like it. And it should be the response of us. Because it's different from almost everything else that we see. They sound like they have so much more fun. Someday I'm going to be back there. We can be good and moral people on our own, but we can never imitate Christ on our own. That only happens when we ask for help, and Christ fills our life. And as I knew I was preaching on this, especially preaching on this, and I muttered stuff under my breath, guess what happened? I was reminded about it. Hey, Jamie, you know what you're preaching on tomorrow, right? Yeah. You know what you need to do? Yeah. You understand that life on the rock is impossible on our own. We may say that we can, we may have the best intentions in the world, we may do everything to be good and moral by the standard of the world. And yet we will still have a house built on the sand. The only way, and I'm just convinced, the only way that we can have a life built on the rock is if we let Christ build it with us. It's painful. It means I can't do everything on my own. It may mean that I have to treat people I don't like better than I think they deserve. But then in those quiet moments, God reminds me that He's treated me better than I deserve. And suddenly when I'm reminded of that, there's a whole lot more grace to come. Our relationships matter. The way we treat even our enemies matters. And if you want to confuse your enemies, and you want to turn this life, this world upside down, love them the way Christ loves you. It will change everything, including you. Just a little bit of hope. Matthew 17:20 and 19:26 basically say the same thing. Jesus was teaching something that was impossible again, and they look at him like, this is impossible, Jesus. And he says to them, for mortals, it is impossible. But for God, all things are. Yeah, it is absolutely impossible for me to be as holy as God. But it is not impossible for God. What a good place to be. This morning I want you to close your eyes, bow your heads. Our kids are awesome at this. I'm not going to make you bend down like they do up here. Because I don't know if you could see Haley today, but she was sitting on the step and her head was on the floor. I can't even dream of that. And I totally blew, but I really do want you to bow your heads, close your eyes, and I want you to have that internal conversation with God. God, where am I at? Am I trying to do this on my own again? Or are we working together? God, I confess the times I've muttered stuff underneath my breath. God, I confess the times that I've treated my enemies the way I think they deserve. God, I confess the times that I have done anything short of your standard. God, forgive me. And help me to love the way you do. Help me to treat people the way you do. Because God, I sure can't do it on my own. Amen. In your bulletin, you have an amazing connection card. And I say it's amazing because so often it slips right by you. It's almost like it's invisible. I want you to pull it out today. Pull out your connection card. Put your name on it. Put your address on it. Put your phone number on it. Because these things change. You know how I know? I try to call you and nobody answers. Or Claudia calls you and nobody answers. Or we get, this number has been changed. Or we send a card and it comes back.
Oh, ID caller.
Give us your new information. But more importantly, mark where you're at on your card. If today is the first time you've ever accepted Christ, mark it. If you have rededicated your life, mark it. Because it matters. And I want to be in prayer for you as you are moving through this journey. And your leadership wants to be in prayer for you. And by the way, 6 of your leadership team members, plus myself, or 6 leaders in the church, spent all day yesterday at a conference in Punxsutawney. They gave up their day. They paid their own way. They paid their own gas so that they could go and learn and bring good stuff back to you. You have amazing leaders. Leaders who truly care and who love you very much. And so when I tell you they'll be praying for you, they will. But mark that. And then I'm going to give you one last thing to mark on your connection card. Since everybody's doing it, I see everybody writing. On the bottom, it says, I'd like a pastor to visit me. Don't all check that because there's no way I could get there this week. But what I would like you to do is mark any sermon topics that you would like to hear this summer. What's something you'd like to hear me preach on this summer? What's something you'd like to learn more about and study? If I can do it, I'll do it. But it's an awesome way to be connected. So fill all this good stuff out. Mark where you're at with Christ. Mark a topic that you just want to learn more about and you think would be a great sermon. And by the way, don't just mark it for the person next to you. This is something that you want. This is not to mark what you think your spouse needs to hear. Unless you need to hear it as well. And as you're doing that, I'm going to ask the praise team to come on up. I really struggled to find a good response song for this message. Because your typical sermon response song is slow and reflective. And yet everyone that I knew just didn't fit. So we went with something that I think is a little more appropriate, it's a little faster, but it's a good song to carry with us. Sometimes we call it Take My Life, sometimes we call it Holiness, which is the name I learned it as I sang this through the 90s. But it's holiness, holiness is what I long for. Because really, as Christ followers, isn't that what we want? To be holy like Christ. Let's respond and sing this song in response.